Excited Utterance, the Evidence and Proof Podcast, episode 157, Alexa Perez, a critical analysis of rap shield laws. Welcome to Excited Utterance. I'm your host, Alex Nunn, from the Texas A&M University School of Law. Excited Utterance is your podcast for cutting-edge scholarship and developments in the world of evidence and proof. We bring virtual workshops to you throughout the academic year. Joining me on Excited Utterance today is Alexa Perez, an assistant professor at Drake University Law School. Alexa and I are chatting about her most recent paper entitled A Critical Analysis of Rap Shield Laws, which is now forthcoming in the Cornell Law Review. In the paper, as well as in our conversation, Alexa takes a hard look at so-called rap shield laws, or the use of rap lyrics in the courtroom. When a prosecuting attorney tries to use a defendant's rap lyrics to prove some element of a case, what evidentiary rules are implicated? How should courts apply those evidentiary rules? And to what extent is reform necessary to properly and appropriately handle rap lyrics in the courtroom? As you'll hear in my conversation with Alexa today, we tackle each of these questions in turn. And ultimately, Alexa provides an incredible amount of insight into the evidentiary treatment of rap lyrics, an issue that is becoming increasingly important both in the courtroom as well as the evidence literature. Alexa, welcome to Excited Utterance.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's really exciting to be here.
Awesome. Well, today we're talking about rap lyrics, which have actually become something of an important issue, both at trial and certainly in the evidence literature. But before we dive into anything too substantive, I just want to kind of unpack things with a basic question. So, Alexa, thinking about rap lyrics, how are they actually used in the courtroom?
Sure. So, as a preliminary matter, rap lyrics are introduced in criminal trials in two contexts. The first is when the rap lyrics are charged as a crime themselves. This happens most often when rap lyrics are charged as, for example, a true threat. This context is not very common, and for reasons I go over in my paper, is outside of the scope of our conversation today. The second context is when rap is introduced as evidence to prove the elements of a crime. This is the most common context in which we see rap lyrics used as evidence and is the focus of my paper. Okay, so back to the basics. When rap is introduced as evidence to prove the elements of a crime, rap lyrics are typically used as both direct and circumstantial evidence. How they're used in a particular case and whether or not they can be used, which we'll get to later, depends, of course, on the substance of the lyrics, the specific facts of the case, and the purpose for which the lyrics are being proffered. That being said, we see rap lyrics being introduced most commonly as proof in cases involving violent crimes, drug offenses, and gang related offenses. In cases in which a violent crime has been charged, rap lyrics are often offered as direct evidence of the crime. In these instances, the lyrics oftentimes bear some kind of resemblance to the charged crime. So, in a case involving a shooting, for example, the defendant's lyrics may contain references to how many times the victim was shot, where the victim was shot, in the head, the back, the chest, etc., how and when the shooting occurred, during a drive-by in the middle of the night, for instance, and how the body may have been disposed. In drug trafficking offenses, rap lyrics are most often admitted to show proof of a drug conspiracy, explain the defendant's preferred process for preparing or delivering the drugs, or his general knowledge of the drug trade. So, for example, courts have admitted rap lyrics indicating the use of, for example, a press machine to facilitate drug trafficking, where there's some other evidence that the defendant, in fact, used a press machine to commit the charged drug offense. And then lastly, rap lyric evidence used in racketeering or gang related cases has been offered to show the existence of the enterprise, the method and means by which the enterprise operated, as well as to show a defendant's motive and intent to act in furtherance of the gang. So, for example, in a case in which a defendant is charged with shooting a member of an opposition gang in aid of racketeering, Rap lyrics containing references to the gang and its members can be used to show that an enterprise existed or also to show that the defendant was motivated by his allegiance to his gang. There are a number of other ways that rap lyrics have been used at trial, but for the most part, these are the most common scenarios that we see.
Awesome. And let's think about the evidentiary implications of rap lyrics for a second. So, under current law, what rules of evidence do rap lyrics implicate? What rules typically control the admissibility of these lyrics?
Sure, so the admissibility of rap lyrics implicates several rules of evidence, and those includes rules regarding relevance, so Rule 401, unfair prejudice, Rule 403, other act evidence, Rule 404b, hearsay, 801, and authentication, 901. But most common, though, rap lyrics overcome kind of relevance or hearsay or authentication challenges. Disputes about the admissibility of rap lyrics typically comes down to whether the rap lyrics can overcome Rule 403, which, as you know, Alex, allows a judge to exclude otherwise relevant evidence if the probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice.
Yeah, and 403 is certainly perhaps the most common and important rule of evidence. I think that's fair to say. So let's camp out there for a second as we imagine the hypothetical scenario where we're evaluating rap lyric evidence in the courtroom. So, under Rule 403, do lyrics typically carry that much probative value? Is it context dependent? What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So it depends, Alex. It depends on the substance of the lyrics, what the lyrics actually say, the particular facts of the case, and of course, the proffered purpose of the lyrics, right? But as a general matter, determining the probative value of rap lyrics raises unique challenges due to the artistic conventions of the genre. In most instances, we assume that a defendant's statements about themselves has some metric of reliability and truth. Most people would not make a statement against their interest in most contexts. But when it comes to rap, the nature of the artistic conventions of the genre complicates those assumptions. First, rap music commonly explores themes of violence, drugs, guns, and other criminal activity through artistic conventions like metaphors, double entendres, and braggadocio. These artistic conventions make it difficult to know whether particular lyrics are an artistic choice, a truthful assertion, or a combination of both. And then, second, the meaning of rap lyrics is further complicated by the tension between what we call commercialization and authenticity. The rap industry is heavily commercialized. It focuses on maximizing profits over showcasing the authentic life of the artist. Rapping about violence, drugs, and guns sells albums. So, unsurprisingly, rap artists rap about violence, drugs, and guns, regardless of whether or not that's an accurate representation of their lives. At the same time, the rap industry is also heavily influenced by a need to be authentic or to quote unquote keep it real. Fans want the stories that artists tell in their music to be real. It's part of their experience in consuming the art. So, in response to this need to keep it real, artists sometimes stand firm in claiming the authenticity of their lyrics. And there are a number of artists who openly talked about this tension. The rapper Future, for example, became famous rapping about heavy drug use. One of his most famous songs is about abusing Molly and Percocet. Years after becoming famous, Future revealed in an interview that he neither drinks nor abuses any drugs, but he hid that truth from fans because feared that he would lose them. At the same time, however, rappers have admitted to engaging in the criminal activities they rapped about. Tekashi 69, for example, recently admitted under oath that keeping it real meant actually engaging in the criminal activity he rapped about to maintain his street cred. All that is to say, Alex, is determining the probative value of rap lyrics is complicated. Even though rap music contains first person accounts of an individual's lifestyle, those lyrics are not necessarily autobiographical. So their truth and their reliability, and subsequently their probative value as evidence, is difficult to determine.
That's a really great survey, Alexa. And I want to look now at the flip side of the Rule 403 coin, if you will, with unfair prejudice. So, thinking about rap lyrics, do they typically contain a high risk of undermining effective fact finding and kind of introducing unfair prejudice into the jury deliberation room?
Certainly. So, rap lyrics no doubt introduce a risk of prejudice in criminal proceedings. And that risk is twofold. First, the content of the lyrics themselves can often inflame jurors. And then, second, stereotypes about the genre and those that create it, typically young men of color, can influence how fact finders interpret those lyrics. So, first, rap music, like we talked about today, often discusses themes of violence, drugs, guns, and other criminal behavior. And the danger associated with introducing rap lyrics that discusses these themes is the potential that a jury could make character assumptions about a defendant based on the content of the lyrics that he wrote, and then improperly find the defendant guilty based on those assumptions. And then beyond just the actual content of rap, stereotypes about the genre influence how listeners interpret rap lyrics. So, despite the growth in popularity of rap music, it's one of the most common forms of music today, studies suggest that individuals still react negatively to rap music and those that create it, particularly when compared to other genres. But importantly, these studies were not juror decision making studies. So while they may suggest that participants have negative perceptions of rap, they say very little about how jurors might actually evaluate rap lyrics during deliberations. I'm aware of only one juror decision making study that has tried to answer that question. And in that study, researchers found that jurors' views or opinions on rap did not predict verdict outcomes. In other words, whatever emotions rap music may invoke in jurors, those emotions may not necessarily affect the process of deliberation. This study suggests that juries may actually be capable of overcoming certain degrees of prejudice in deliberation. So, yes, rap lyrics often carry a risk of prejudice, but so does all evidence, right? So, the question we should be worried about is whether rap lyrics introduce the risk of unfair prejudice. And the only juror decision making study on this issue suggests that rap may not be inherently unfair in every instance. Instead, whether rap lyrics are unfairly prejudicial depends on the facts of the case, the substance of the lyrics, and again, the proffered purpose of those lyrics.
Perfect. Well, that is a wonderful analysis of rap lyrics under Rule 403. And I want to extend the conversation here for a second. Alexa, are there any other concerns with using rap lyrics as evidence? I know you talked about, a list of potential evidentiary objections that they might implicate, but I'm particularly interested in, say, Rule 404B, the prohibition of past bad acts in the courtroom. Is that salient here, or are there any other concerns, like First Amendment concerns, perhaps?
Yeah, so starting first with the Rule 404 concerns. That rule, as you and listeners probably know, protects against the use of propensity evidence, or in other words, bars evidence of a person's character to show that on a particular occasion, that person acted in accordance with that character trait. Part of the concern when you introduce rap lyrics is that you run the risk that when the jury hears a person accused of a crime, rapping about that crime, the jury may assume that that person committed the charged crime. In other words, if you introduce rap lyrics about guns and drugs, in a case where a defendant is charged with drug and gun offenses, you run the risk that the jury will view the defendant as a violent drug dealer and find the defendant guilty of the charged offenses for improper reasons. But Rule 404 does allow evidence to be introduced for non propensity purposes, including to prove things like motive, intent, and knowledge. So, rap lyrics are often introduced for these non propensity purposes. So, then there are the First Amendment concerns. Part of that concern is that if we allow the use of rap lyrics as evidence in criminal proceedings, we may chill artistic expression. Or, in other words, if artists know that their lyrics may later be used against them in court, they might think twice before writing them. And that's a really real concern. The use of rap lyrics as evidence has, in some ways, changed the music industry. Rap artists are becoming increasingly more cautious about the content of their lyrics because they recognize that listeners are not just their fans, but also law enforcement and subsequently prosecutors. Some artists, for example, have started to actually include disclaimers in their music, noting at the start of a song that the content is not real. But whether the evidentiary use of rap actually violates the First Amendment, that is a separate issue. I'm, Alex, not a First Amendment scholar, so I'll leave that sort of bigger question for the First Amendment experts out there. But even assuming that the evidentiary use of rap violates the First Amendment, the question of admissibility, I think, is independent from the question of constitutionality. The admissibility question is one resolved by applying the rules of evidence, and then the constitutionality question by applying First Amendment jurisprudence. Doctrinally, these are separate issues. So, to the extent that the admission of evidence is unconstitutional, the admissibility inquiry stops there, right? Whether evidence is admissible under the rules of evidence doesn't matter. Indeed, Rule 402 recognizes this. It says that relevant evidence is admissible unless the Constitution provides otherwise. So, to put a finer point on this, if there are First Amendment concerns, I think our First Amendment jurisprudence, rather than the rules of evidence, should take care of those concerns.
Perfect. Well, rap lyrics clearly giving rise to kind of a constellation of evidentiary issues. And it kind of leads us to the ultimate question that I'm sure our listeners are interested in. Alexa, putting all of these rules that we've talked about together, are rap lyrics typically admissible? Kind of descriptively looking at court behavior, how have courts approached this issue to this point?
Sure. So courts have recognized that the admission of rap lyrics as evidence presents some of the unique challenges that we talked about here today. And courts have tried to reconcile those concerns by holding that the probative value of rap lyrics increases and subsequently the danger of unfair prejudice decreases when there is a factual and temporal nexus between the content of the rap lyric and the specific details of the charged crime. The more closely rap lyrics recount key details of events in the case, and the closer in time the rap lyrics were written to the charged crime, the more probative the lyrics become. Under this standard, courts have generally excluded rap lyrics when those lyrics bear only a tenuous connection to the charged crime. So, for example, courts have excluded rap lyrics that contain merely vague and generic references to some of the common themes in rap music that we've talked about: guns, drugs, and violence. But the degree of nexus that courts require for admission depends on the particular facts of the case and the proffered purpose of the lyric. So, for example, in cases in which rap lyrics are offered as direct evidence of a violent crime, courts have required a very close nexus between the rap lyrics and the details of the charged crime. In a case in which a defendant is charged with shooting someone, for example, rap lyrics that contain only generic references to guns may not be sufficiently probative. But rap lyrics that contain references to the particular manner of death, for example, 6 gunshots to the head, or the manner in which the victim's body was disposed, then increases the probative value of those lyrics. In cases where the rap lyrics are being introduced as evidence of motive and intent, however, courts don't really require such a close factual nexus. So let's go back to the defendant that was charged with the shooting. Now assume that the defendant's motive in that shooting was gang related and the victim was a member of the opposition gang. This time, rap lyrics that do not contain details of the shooting itself, but instead contain references to the defendant's involvement in a gang and perhaps animosity towards an opposition gang, may still be highly probative of the defendant's motive, even if those rap lyrics don't recount key details of the shooting itself. Lastly, if admission is warranted under these standards, courts have also relied on a number of procedural measures to further mitigate the concerns with introducing rap lyrics as evidence. Courts have, for example, redacted lyrics that don't meet these nexus requirements, allowed experts to testify as to the artistic conventions of rap and the meaning of particular lyrics, and they've also provided jury with limiting instructions on the use of rap lyrics as evidence.
Thanks, Alexa. That's a wonderful survey. And I also want to ask about something of an emerging trend that might change the calculus of what we see in courtrooms today. So perhaps given the high stakes at issue when it comes to rap lyrics, recent years have seen the emergence of so-called rap shield laws. Now, some of our listeners will kind of catch the clear analog here to Federal Rule of Evidence 412 and rape shield laws. But if you would, Alexa, tell us about rap shield laws. What are those?
Sure. So, as you noted, in response to sort of recent high profile cases in which rap lyrics were used as evidence, Federal and state legislators have introduced rap shield laws to fill what they perceive as a gap in our evidence laws. These laws are intended to shield or protect rap music from courtroom use. So far, California and Louisiana have enacted such statutes. And then bills in Congress and states like New York, Georgia, Illinois, Maryland, and Missouri, they're still pending. Legislators have taken varying approaches in drafting rap shield laws, but the most common is California's approach. So I'm going to talk about California's approach. That approach imposes a presumption of inadmissibility unless the proffering party can prove by clear and convincing evidence a factual and temporal nexus between the rap lyrics and the charged crimes. What this means is the statutes invert the Rule 403 balancing test and places a thumb on the scale of exclusion. Statutes in this category also impose certain procedural requirements, including redactions, the use of expert testimony, and limiting instructions. So even though the motivation behind these laws is the protection of rap music and those that create it, none of the proposed statutes are so narrow in scope. Instead, all of the statutes go beyond limiting the use of rap and extend to all forms of artistic expression. And each of these statutes uses the same sort of broad definition of artistic expression, and we'll get to why this broad definition matters in a moment.
Yeah, well, let's pick up right on that note because it's fascinating. I'm super interested in the intended benefits of these laws. So you touched on this just now in your answer, but I'm curious if we might unpack this a bit more. What exactly are these rap shield laws designed to accomplish? What are the intended benefits that lawmakers see by passing this particular rule or codifying this rule?
Sure. So ultimately, rap shield laws are intended to exclude rap lyrics from criminal proceedings and to protect and encourage artistic expression. In effect, rap shield statutes, particularly those that follow the California model, they increase judicial scrutiny over the admissibility of rap music, both substantively and procedurally. In theory, these changes make it more likely that rap lyric evidence will be excluded, leading presumably to more favorable results for individuals accused of crimes. And ultimately, it would help us address the racial disparities in our criminal justice system. What I argue in the paper, however, Alex, is that rap shield laws are at best duplicative. They merely codify the nexus framework that courts are already employing under our current evidence rules. That is, courts are already relying on the substantive and procedural measures that rap shields propose to codify. So the effect of codifying these rules into law, I argue, is actually pretty minimal. So now, Alex, you and maybe some of our listeners may be, of course, wondering, well, so what, right? Aren't most of our rules of evidence a codification of what courts were doing at some point in time? Rap shield laws, they provide judges with a framework to consider when determining the admissibility of rap lyrics. If these proposals can serve as guidance to the judiciary and remind them of this need for a factual and temporal nexus, then that's generally a good thing. And I agree. The problem, I think, and the problem I identify in the paper is that the marginal benefit of that judicial guidance may actually come with some unintended consequences that I think ultimately undermine fact finding and, in some instances, undercut the very goals of the proposals.
And let me pick up on that thread as well. What are these unintended consequences that you see with these rap shield laws?
Yeah, so in my paper, I argue that while rap shield laws, as currently drafted, may help guide judicial decision making and encourage sort of closer judicial scrutiny, those are arguably marginal benefits that may be outweighed by some potential unintended consequences. So I identify some of those unintended consequences in the paper. First, the rap shield laws, they're neutral laws, so they limit a defendant's ability to present creative expression just as much as the prosecution's. So, to be sure, the statute is going to affect the prosecution's ability to present evidence more than it will a defendant's. But there have been a number of cases in which it's actually the defendant that offers the rap lyrics to prove their innocence or to rebut the prosecution's evidence. And in these instances, rap shield laws would impose a higher standard on the defendant's ability to present their case. Second, looking at the procedural safeguards in some of these proposals, they encourage the use of expert testimony. And I think the intent behind this procedural safeguard is to encourage more rap scholars to testify on behalf of defendants. But in practice, I think this procedural safeguard will actually just lead to more law enforcement officers testifying as gang experts, interpreting rap lyrics on behalf of the prosecution, which of course undermines the intent of these laws, right? And then lastly, although rap shield laws are meant to protect rap music, like I noted earlier, they apply instead to all artistic expression. And as you can imagine, defining art and what constitutes art is a tall order. The definition of art has been in debate between philosophers for, centuries. Part of the problem is that art defies simple definition. And I think the drafters of rap shield laws resorted to an extremely broad definition of art, and the exact language of that definition is important, so I'm going to read it. It says, quote, the definition or the expression or application of creativity or imagination in the production or arrangement of forms, sounds, words, movements, or symbols, including but not limited to music, dance, performance art, visual art, poetry, literature, and film. Such a broad definition means that rap shield laws may be invoked to exclude almost anything of evidentiary value, including in some cases highly probative evidence that extends well beyond music. And this isn't just, an imaginative sort of slippery slope argument. In the less than 2 years since California passed their rap shield law, defendants have invoked the law to attempt to exclude things like gang tattoos and sex dolls, neither of which present the same concerns that propelled the new legislation. There may also be a host of other unforeseen consequences, but these are just a few that I identify in the paper.
So obviously, I'm very interested in your opinion on kind of the normative question here. What should we do with rap lyrics? So, what do you think is the best path forward when it comes to the evidentiary treatment of rap lyrics in the courtroom?
Yeah, so that's a $1 million question, right, Alex? And that's a really difficult question. So, on the one hand, we've talked about the challenges that come with analyzing rap lyrics under our current evidentiary framework. But I've struggled to come up with a better alternative. When I first started looking at this issue, I kept trying to think about, okay, well, how would I amend these proposals to make them better? And each time I tried to do that, I came up with, another host of unforeseen consequences. So I've really struggled to come up with a better alternative. And I think that the unintended consequences that I've identified highlight that struggle. So weighing what I think are the marginal benefits of the judicial guidance against the risk of some of these unintended consequences, I argue that perhaps, while not a perfect solution, we may be better off stringently applying our current rules of evidence rather than trying to amend them to solve this issue.
I have one final question for you, Alexa. What's next for the literature here? Is there an additional paper or an idea that might help us better understand or better treat rap lyrics in the courtroom?
Yeah, so I think there are two papers that would shed further light on this issue. So the first is, I think, additional jury decision-making studies on the effect of rap lyrics on jury deliberations. I think it'd be helpful to better understand the prejudicial effect that rap lyrics may have on fact finding. And this may shed further light on whether the best path forward is, as some scholars have proposed, sort of categorical exclusion, or as I argue, sticking with the current rules. And then second, I'd like to see a paper that takes a closer look at the effect of the California legislation. So at the time that I wrote my piece, there were only a handful of decisions in California discussing the new legislation. So as more time passes, I think it'd be interesting to measure the effect of the California legislation and see whether rap shields are actually accomplishing their goals or whether some of my predictions on the unintended consequences are true.
This has been an amazing and informative conversation. Alexa, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Alex. It was super fun to be here.
I really enjoyed Alexa's article. I think it's excellent. I think it's a definitive look at rap lyrics in the courtroom. And I think it joins other incredible Articles by leading scholars such as Andrea Dennis and Gozio Kitabe and others who have analyzed the issues and potential reform of rap lyric evidence in the courtroom. I also think, though, that Alexa's paper gives us cause to analyze a broader question. When is it that we should trust Rule 403 to handle evidentiary issues in the courtroom, even evidentiary issues that might be hugely important, such as those at issue with rap lyric evidence? And when is it instead that we need a specialized rule of evidence, like Rules 407 through 411, that delineates the admissibility of, say, a subsequent remedial measure, or evidence of a plea bargain, or evidence of settlement negotiations? It dictates that analysis directly, notwithstanding what Rule 403 might dictate. And to my mind, after kind of a quick mental survey of the rules of evidence in case law, it seems to me that there's a fairly clear division. So, in instances where Rule 403 properly handles the evidence, so for example, if we have rap lyrics that have minimal probative value but carry significant unfair prejudice, therefore should be excluded, in those situations, it seems like our evidentiary codes and courts typically leave Rule 403 to handle that particular issue. We trust courts to say, hey, you will correctly identify that Rule 403 should exclude this evidence, and therefore no intervention is necessary. When is it, though, that we take the opposite approach, that we directly intervene, codifying rules that delineate, hey, subsequent remedial measures, those need to be inadmissible. Hey, statements made during settlement negotiations, those should be inadmissible. Well, it seems to me that we only have those specialized rules, special rules dealing with those particular topics, if a usurpation of Rule 403 is required. So, for example, if you have a situation where, let's say, a civil defendant kind of admits to infringing upon someone's rights during settlement negotiations, that's pretty probative evidence, right? The defendant, the opposing party, admitting to a, say, breach of contract, I don't think evidence gets much more probative than that. So, under Rule 403, regardless of how much unfair prejudice might be associated with that statement, there's not going to be a situation where that unfair prejudice substantially outweighs the high probative value of that party admission. But nonetheless, Rule 408 excludes the evidence from the courtroom because of the policy justification, right? The desire to have efficient settlement negotiations buoyed by an environment that is firewalled off, an environment where parties know that their admissions will not be later used against them in court. So, what we see then with Rule 408 is a Rule 403 usurpation. That party admission should be admissible, rightly admissible, under Rule 403. But 408 steps in and says, hey, even though this is evidence that has probative value, that is not substantially outweighed by any risk of unfair prejudice, we're going to nonetheless exclude this evidence because it has this deleterious impact on this policy goal that we're trying to achieve, namely the facilitation of settlements. And I think that kind of distinct treatment between rap lyrics under 403 and a party admission during settlement negotiations under Rule 403 really predicts when a specialized rule is necessary. If Rule 403, properly applied, provides strong treatment of a particular evidentiary issue, well, then no specialized rule is necessary. However, if the proper application of Rule 403 leads to a result that we deem undesirable for either policy reasons or reasons extraneous to the assessment of probative value and unfair prejudice, well, that then is a situation where we need to have a specialized rule. Now, Alexa in her paper has given a very compelling account that rap lyrics perhaps don't fall in that category, that Rule 403, properly applied, should be sufficient to exclude rap lyrics from the courtroom when the risk of unfair prejudice substantially outweighs the probative value, if any probative value, associated with rap lyrics. But the question still remains, is there ever a situation where we want to usurp that Rule 403 analysis, even if rap lyrics are probative? Would it be worthwhile to exclude them from the courtroom, particularly because, as Alexa has noted, rap lyrics are used in the courtroom in a disproportionate fashion against minority defendants? Should we just take that evidence off the table? regardless of how the 403 analysis comes down? I think that is the central question for lawmakers in the years ahead. Support for Excited Utterance is generously provided by Vanderbilt Law School's Branstetter Litigation and Dispute Resolution Program, as well as the Texas A&M University School of Law. The producer is Ed Chang, and the production editor is Anirudh Barella. Additional assistance was provided by Lexi Whitaker, and background music is provided by Kirsten Castle-Greer, Felix Wong, and Alex Crew. I'm your host, Alex Nunn, and I hope you'll join me next time as we explore another piece in the world of evidence and proof.